We're getting towards the end of the season in December, and on this property in particular, we're not going to be hunting. If we do, it's going to be for a couple does in the late season. So I enjoy getting out here and starting the review process and the scouting process for next year. And one of the things that I think is very important is for you to take a look at your trail cameras and take a look at how many deer are actually checking out your trail cameras, looking at your trail cameras, staring at your trail cameras. And that number of deer and the number of deer that are looking at your trail camera should be a very, very low percentage of your overall pictures. We set out to create this video, and I created a video like this last year. I call it your trail cam pick ratios. I talked about that deer should be looking at your camera less than 5 times out per 100 pictures. I really believe in that number. We set out this year to look at, say, okay, what is our best trail camera out of the 3 properties we have and 16 trail cameras out? What is the best one that shows the fewest number of deer looking at the trail camera? We started looking through everything and reflecting on the entire season. And there was an interesting thing we noticed. All but 1, 2, or 3 of our cameras featured an entire hunting season of deer never looking at the trail camera, and I'm not lying. So when we start talking about looking in the past, it's, 5 deer out of 100 if they're looking in, that's okay. The more and more I look at this, deer should never be looking at your trail camera. And of course, if you get 1, 2, 3, 10 deer looking out per 1,000, it's not a big deal. But that ratio, instead of being 5 per 100, should really be less than 1%. And that's what we're finding in our cameras. And it doesn't take much. It really doesn't. When deer are focusing on your camera and they're looking at your camera, that is a very bad thing. And what I notice is that the does and fawns in a given area, we have does and fawns bedding right here. So this is an area that's pretty sacred to them, and they don't really feel any hunter pressure. We have a stand over here. We hunted 3 or 4 times this year at the most in 3 months total. So the deer are not pressured at all in this area. But when you have deer looking at your camera, they know something's up. The does and fawns get used to it. The young bucks don't care about anything. They're basically the least experienced deer in the woods. You say dumbest, but they don't notice much at all. So you can't really go by on young bucks. Mature does and fawns, they get used to that daily behavior of going in and out of their daily habits, and as a herd, not really caring much about more than security, food, cover, going back and forth every single day. But a mature buck is a different animal. How many times have you guys out there seen a buck that you get 1 picture of? And a lot of times hunters will say, well, yeah, that buck was just randomly coming through the property. I don't think that's true. I think a lot of times they pick your camera spots out, they pick that hunter activity, they're used to smelling something, seeing that box in the tree, and they leave. So what we're finding, instead of picking out the best trail cam location and saying, this is the best setup for us personally that featured the fewest number of deer, we can't do that because 13, 14 out of our cameras featured 0 deer looking at the camera. And again, it doesn't take much. You see this camera right here, I'm 5'9". This camera's located about 6 foot. It's angled down to about where the camera's at right now, and that's on video for me. And the silhouette is broken up. We have this dead branch coming out right here. So yeah, this is a different color camel than the tree itself, but it really doesn't stick out. It's high enough. And I would say as long as you're keeping that camera on a tree that's wider than the camera, and that camera is about 6 foot high or higher and angled down, that'll eliminate a huge percentage of the deer that actually look up at the camera. Again, this camera features 0 deer looking up at this camera. We have other things to actually focus our attention on too, so that helps. So this is not just on a random runway located hip high, just looking down the trail. You're going to get almost every deer that comes by picking out that camera. Great way to test that. Have that camera there, look at your nighttime and daytime photos. A lot of times you'll see every deer that goes by during the daytime is looking at that camera. And if you have an infrared camera, I would never use the red bulb cameras at all. They will spook deer greatly. If this was red bulb, they'd look at it and they'd spook. If it was a red infrared, this is a blackout camera from Exodus. It's a Lift 2 model. The deer don't see them. But test this yourself. Look at the number of deer that look at your camera during the daylight. And if you have a blackout camera, look at the number of deer that don't look at it at night. You should see a stark contrast. Again, if it's infrared, they're going to look at it at night even more during the day. But they don't like those boxes. That's been purely proven over and over again, if they can see the silhouette of that box and that camera, they're going to look at it, especially those mature bucks. Think about that when you're setting these trail cameras up. Very easy to not get deer to look at them. If your mature bucks are noticing them, if you're getting one mature buck on a particular camera and he's buggering out and you never see him again, it's probably that he can see the camera, he can see the infrared flash. This is a great time to review that because it does affect your hunting property greatly. They don't just move. If they find something that disturbs them, a mature buck, what I found is they don't just move 20 yards over and go by. They smell your handrails on your tree stand. If you accidentally brush your hair against or under a mock scrape or a scrape and you leave that scent and they smell it one time, they're gone 100, 200 yards over. It's not that they just move over, and that's the same with the trail camera. We find if they're picking out that box, they're picking out the infrared of that camera, then they're going to move, and a lot of times it's 100, 200 yards away, which could mean that they're going to be off your property. And at the same time, whatever you can do to make sure that those mature bucks are not noticing you, and we're talking during the hunting season. I really don't care what happens in June, July, August. It's not going to affect your hunting season. But please review those trail cams and reveal your pictures, review them, and see how many deer are actually looking at that trail camera. We find that our best setups and most of our setups are revealing 0 deer that are looking at them, and that's that ratio that you should look for. Again, it's not going to matter if it's a few pictures out of 1,000, but it really does matter, and especially when you get up to 5%, 10% of the deer that are walking by, because mature bucks are not like every other deer in the woods. They do notice when things are out of place. They are very spooky. They want to be reclusive, and they don't want any hunter intrusion. A trail camera can be a hunter intrusion if you don't set it up properly. And I hope you look at these steps because it's pretty easy to make sure that deer do not look at your trail cameras.